Today we're going to make a bed that lets you watch movies on the ceiling. The frame and headboard for the bed are going to be made out of 3/4 inch thick furniture grade plywood. I clamped down a straight edge and then used my circular saw to rip the pieces. I'll put dimension drawings for this project up on my website as soon as I get the chance. I used a speed square to guide my circular saw when I cut the pieces to length. The platform for the bed is going to be 2 layers of plywood thick, so I applied wood glue to the pieces and then clamped them together. The bottom piece is going to stick out about 3.5 inches past the top piece, so I used a scrap piece of wood to make sure that I could apply pressure with the clamps to this offset edge. After letting the glue cure on these first 2 pieces, I then laid out the entire platform and then cut the support pieces for the front and back. I glued these pieces together to make half-lap joints. If I wanted the platform to come apart easily, I would have just used screws, but since this platform isn't that big as it is, I decided just to glue it all together. Alright, frame for the platform is done. Time to start on the headboard. I glued in the edge supports for the headboard and then took field measurements so I could cut the top and bottom supports at just the right length. I want the headboard to be at an angle, so I set my circular saw to 30 degrees and then trimmed the edge. But then I realized I cut the wrong side, so I had to flip it over, reset my straight edge, and then cut it again. There we go, now that's the right angle. I then clamped down the straight edge and cut one of the edges of the platform at the same angle. Overall, my glue up was pretty clean, but there was a couple places where a few drops squeezed out, and I just used a chisel to scrape those away. I cleaned up the edges with some sandpaper, and I just gently rounded them over just a little bit. I then sealed the wood with 2 coats of Varathane water-based polyurethane in crystal clear matte. It was a little bit sloppier with the glue up on the headboard, so I used the orbital sander first with 100 grit pads before finishing with 150 grit. I then used the water-based polyurethane on this piece as well. While I was waiting for the polyurethane to cure, I started working on the legs. I was making up the design as I went, and I knew that I needed to really reinforce that angled connection between the headboard and the platform. So I got on my angle grinder and a piece of 3-inch wide steel flat bar, and then just cut part of the way through with my angle grinder, just enough to make it easy to bend. I then cut a piece of plywood at a 60-degree angle, drilled some large holes in it so that I could create a guide that would let me precisely clamp the steel at a nice 60-degree angle. I then played around with some scrap pieces to figure out the length that I would want. I just kept adjusting them until I thought it looked good and would result in a bed that was just about 10 to 11 inches off the ground. I then took some measurements and then cut the pieces to length. I used my angle grinder to clean up the ends of the pieces in preparation for welding. Alright, I was now ready to start welding. I started by re-clamping the bent piece, and then using my MIG welder to reinforce the scored part where I had cut about halfway through the steel. Now that my steel is set perfectly at 60 degrees, I can now tack weld in the other 2 leg pieces. Now I want each of these 2 brackets to be exactly the same, so I just tacked them in at first, so that I could compare them to each other and make sure they perfectly lined up before going back in and reinforcing all the welds. I'm using my Forney 3-in-1 Easy Weld. It's a fantastic, affordable machine that is great for furniture projects like this, but is also powerful enough that I could use it to do all the welding on the shipping container house. I then checked to see how high the legs would hold the platform and started to make the back legs. These are a lot easier because it's just 3 pieces of flat bar. I used magnet clamps to hold them in place, adjusted them till I had them at the right height, and then tack welded them together. Once I could see that they were exactly the same height, I then went back in again and reinforced the welds. Now I'm just welding with flux core wire and no shielding gas, so the welds can get a little bit splattery, but I just took an angle grinder with a wire brush and cleaned them all up. I'm going to screw these to the underside of the plywood platform, so I just drilled some holes, making sure to apply some cutting oil so I don't burn out my drill bits. I cleaned the cutting oil off of the steel and then coated it with Rust-Oleum's Rusty Metal Primer. You'll notice that I'm wearing the same dust mask that I use for sanding. This is called an RZmask, and it's by far the most comfortable and best dust mask I have ever used. It was pretty windy when I was doing the priming, so I got a few drips, but I just hand sanded those out before painting the steel with Rust-Oleum protective enamel in flat white. I measured about 5 inches in from the edges and then used panhead screws to screw these metal brackets into place. We then flipped the platform over and we're ready to screw on the headboard. Cut some 6-inch wide slats from the leftover plywood and then screwed those into place. Alright, now with the bed frame taking shape, I was ready to start figuring out how I was going to mount the projector. The projector came from ViewSonic, which is the sponsor for this video. They sent me the X10 4K smart projector and it's really nice. It's compact and lightweight, has a nice graphite color with this leather-like trim. It comes with a remote control and all the cables that you'll need, but what I really like about it is that it's really easy to wirelessly sync it to my phone. And I don't have to download any extra apps or anything like that. I finished checking out all the cool features, took some measurements, and now I was ready to build a bracket that would let me project onto the ceiling. I got a piece of 1/8 of an inch thick steel plate that was about 6 inches wide. I scored some lines so that I could bend it so it would sort of act as a hook and hook around the top of the headboard. I love designing like this, where you just grab a piece of scrap and just make it up as you go. Alright, now that I have a rough hook that could sort of cradle the projector, I hooked it over the headboard and then used a level to mark the location of where I needed to trim off the excess. I cut off this extra piece and then started prepping the steel for welding. Scoring the steel makes it nice and easy to bend, but it leaves you with really weak joints. So I just went back in and welded to fill in the gaps and then ground it out so that it would be a nice smooth transition. I scored and bent some 1/4 inch steel rod to make a guide that would keep the projector from falling out of the bracket. I then welded this to the bracket, making sure to push it all flat to the ground to keep everything nice and straight. This piece also got painted white. I thought I was ready to start testing it out, so I opened up the new mattress that my friends over at Tuft & Needle sent me and quickly discovered that the bed had a little bit too much flex in it. The brackets that were supporting the headboard were bending just a little bit too much, so I took them off and cut a piece of 3/8 inch diameter steel rod to weld into place. My Ryobi cordless rotary tool came in really handy for getting into those tight corners to grind away all the paint. I welded in the steel rod and was ready for a second round of painting. While I was waiting for that paint, I used some Gorilla 2-part epoxy to glue in 2 small pieces of oak to the bottom of the bracket that's going to support the projector. I put the bed back together and finally was ready to test it all out. The bracket hooks over the headboard and the projector fits in nicely. And not only can I use this bracket to allow the projector to project onto the ceiling, I can also use it horizontally to project on the wall opposite the bed. This projector is awesome. The picture is crystal clear, the sound is really great because they collaborated with Harman Kardon, and it's really easy to play content directly from my phone or from my laptop without plugging in any wires. It also has wireless capabilities, so you can play Netflix directly from the projector itself using the remote control. The bed looks great on its own, especially with the linen bedding that Tuft & Needle sent me. but the ceiling projector definitely takes it to another level. For more information, be sure to check out our website. I'll post some drawings of this project. Check out some of our other videos, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thanks!